Hello, scholars and saints. So we're back to look at a few more pages of what is capitalism. So basically, in the last video, we talked about how capitalism keeps force and violence out of the ring, I guess you could say, because it is freedom. And I was watching just a bit of Milton Friedman's, I guess, response to some young man who was asking him, to defend capitalism against its connection with oppression. And Milton Friedman said something that I thought was pretty interesting. He said that wherever you find freedom, you'll find capitalism, yet capitalism is not sufficient for freedom. So you need capitalism and other elements. So I thought that was an interesting thing to say. He also said that regardless of the dominant economic system of a nation, there's always going to be capitalistic elements. And I thought that was interesting too, just that it's not often able to economic systems are not often so well divided, or you know what I mean. So I thought that was interesting. I'm gonna have to watch the rest of that video. I have to watch it for my political econ class, which yesterday I had my class. I was a little bit late, but all is well. We're switching over to talking about neoclassical economics versus the classical, which was represented, at least in our class, by 3 weeks of Adam Smith, which I thought was great. And but that's maybe another video. So in this section, Ayn Rand is kind of transitioning to the idea that capitalism allows us to be free. It keeps us from being compelled by physical force, to the idea that we also are not compelled or forced by a certain statement of morality, that we can be free to think what we want and buy what we want based on our own ability to be rational. So she doesn't say that necessarily that values are relative. She said that there are values or sentiments or ideas or decisions that are objectively more reasonable than others, but that doesn't mean that people with limited reason will be forced to choose the higher, more objectively reasonable sentiments, moralities, decision, etc. So basically she's saying that capitalism allows us to be superficial, to make the wrong choices that will not really make us happy, etc. And that's a good thing. But she says that nevertheless, the minority that does follow, does have an ability to reason and enjoy high values, I guess, that they will end up in the long term leading the masses and causing the nation to grow and progress in the direction of philosophically objective, I guess, goals. There we go. So that's kind of a summary. So let's go ahead and read this so you see that is what it says. So we're starting at the end of page 15, And she is starting out talking about the physical force, but she's going to move into values, subjective values. Or actually, she doesn't call them subjective. Even if someone is unreasonable, they're objective to that person, I think. Okay, we'll see. If one knows that the good is objective, i.e. determined by the nature of reality, but to be discovered by man's mind, one knows that an attempt to achieve the good by physical force is a monstrous contradiction which negates morality at its root by destroying man's capacity to recognize the good, i.e. his capacity to value. So maybe it's kind of like, it's not really a moral decision if you're not making it yourself via your own judgment. Force invalidates and paralyzes a man's judgment, demanding that he act against it, thus rendering him morally impotent. So if you can't judge, you can't be moral. A value which one is forced to accept at the price of surrendering one's mind is not a value to anyone. The forcibly mindless can neither judge nor choose value. An attempt to achieve the good by force is like an attempt to provide a man with a picture gallery at the price of cutting out his eyes, which I think is kind of graphic. So thanks, Rand, for that. Values cannot exist, cannot be valued outside of the full context of a man's life, needs, goals, and knowledge. The objective view of values permeates the entire structure of a capitalist society. So she's very much giving a response to Plato's Republic, whose entire system is based on manipulating people and forcing them to align with and believe and internalize certain values. So he believes, for instance, in censorship. So he's not allowing people to make choices. He's taking out the bad choices so they can't decide on those. So they can't choose those. So I think that's interesting. So she definitely values freedom more than what would be maybe a utopic hope for, I guess, having a more, choose your adjective that you think society or human beings should be. Instead of like having these objective, maybe she would say, philosophically objective values of high art and aesthetics and, well, I don't know if she would say this, but I would say mindfulness, compassion, kindness, treating each other well, balancing material pursuits with spiritual. So I have my own sort of list of, I guess, what I think are philosophically objective values, but she doesn't want to take, and Plato has his own, right? In the Republic, but it's I guess she's saying that the ends don't justify the means. She's focused on the means, that part is ethical, which I feel is, that's a nice thought. Okay, the recognition of individual rights implies the recognition of the fact that the good is not an ineffable abstraction in some supernatural dimension, but a value pertaining to reality, to this earth, to the lives of individual human beings. Note the right to the pursuit of happiness. It implies that the good cannot be divorced from beneficiaries, that men are not to be regarded as interchangeable, and that no man or tribe may attempt to achieve the good of some at the price of the immolation of the others. So I guess she looks at, if we do have, an authoritarian group making a statement of how everyone should be and think and feel, maybe she is referring to like religious groups who have tried to do that. And so she just finds that very problematic. But I think also it doesn't have to be religious groups. It could be just anyone thinking that whatever they believe is best for everyone. That said, she has this idea of philosophically objective values, which if people were reasonable and smart enough, then in the best situations and circumstances, then they would agree with. So I don't know. She's really being like, I mean, how, like, from where does her, I guess she would not consider herself a part of that, supernatural dimension where she's getting her values, because hers is based on reason. But it just sounds like semantics. Like, where does, I don't know. Like, someone could like claim they're being reasonable, but you have to defend that, and it has to make sense to people. So I don't know. So I don't want to use the word hypocritical, but it's just a thought. The free market represents the social application of an objective theory of values. Since values are to be discovered by man's mind, men must be free to discover them, to think, to study, to translate their knowledge into physical form, to offer their products for trade, to judge them, and to choose, be it material goods or value or ideas, a loaf of bread, or a philosophical treatise. Since values are established contextually, every man must judge for himself in the context of his own knowledge, goals, and interests. So basically she's saying that, to me, she's saying that she will basically, defend to the death, just to be the hyperbole, a person's right to decide and think as they will. Because she's about to say that, they will be, there is consequences to that, though. If you think it's completely reasonable to, I don't know what she would say, spend more money than you should, and be, sort of profligate with your salary. I don't know, is that the right word? She would say, well, you'll figure out that the last week of the month you don't have enough for food, and so you'll change your ways and budget and become increasingly or incrementally, hopefully, more reasonable. Since values are determined by the nature of reality, it is reality that serves as men's ultimate arbiter. If a man's judgment is right, the rewards are his. If it is wrong, he is his only victim. It is in regard to a free market that the distinction between an intrinsic, subjective, and objective view of values is particularly important to understand. The market value of a product is not an intrinsic value, not a value in itself hanging in a vacuum. So that's interesting, because I guess classical economics really saw the value, which is the price of a commodity, as the sum of basically the labor and the material costs and the time, etc., just everything that went into it, and there was a real intrinsic value. When neoclassical economics came along, they switched from focusing on the production to consumption, and they said the value is actually based on the perception of the consumer. And so since businesses want to rationally maximize their profit and consumers want to rationally maximize their utility, ideally, if both sides, the sellers and the buyers, stay rational, then there's going to be a communally decided price. Yet, there's admission that businesses are going to do what they can to manipulate the perception of the consumer and keep them from being rational. So I think that Rand is kind of, I don't know, she might be in response to both of those kind of trains of thought or camps of economic perspective. Because I don't know if we would say that neoclassical economic theory feels that that is an intrinsic value if it's based on the consumer's perception, which can be manipulated to the point of irrationality. A free market never loses sight of the question of value to whom, and so she wants to protect that. Like, if you want to buy like ridiculous things off of Instagram, then go to it. Like, she wants to protect your right to do that. And within the broad field of objectivity, the market value of a product does not reflect its philosophically objective value. So that's the one that, you know, is her sort of standards, or that she says that there are standards out there that she aligns with, I guess. But only its socially objective value. So it's still objective, but it's derived socially, based on individuals' reason, which doesn't have to be all that reasonable. By philosophically objective, I mean a value estimated from the standpoint of the best possible to man, i.e. from the criterion of the most rational mind possessing the greatest knowledge. So this is philosophically objective. In a given category, in a given period, and in a defined context, nothing can be estimated in an undefined context. For instance, it can be rationally proved that the airplane is objectively of immeasurable greater value to man at his best, than the bicycle. See, and this is where I have like slight trouble, because, I mean, can we disagree with that? I don't know. Like she says that, like, if you don't agree with it, then you're not being rational. But like, unless she goes into like a defense of that, I don't know. I feel like I could defend the bicycle, so I don't know. And that the works of Victor Hugo are objectively of immeasurably greater value than true confession magazines. But so I would say that, you know, isn't this just sort of an elitist perspective? But then everyone has their own ideal. It's just like, why does she get to say what is the most reasonable? I mean, maybe she's not, but that's maybe the danger of anyone talking about high versus low decisions, I guess. So she says, so there are these, you know, judgments that she's making. So she's not being relativistic. But if a given man's intellectual potential can barely manage to enjoy true confessions, there's no reason why his meager earnings, the product of his effort, should be spent on books he cannot read, or on subsidizing the airplane industry if his own transportation needs do not extend beyond the range of a bicycle. I would like to have a bicycle. Nor is there any reason why the rest of mankind should be held down to the level of his literary taste, his engineering capacity, and his income. Values are not determined by fiat or by the majority vote. So it goes both ways, I guess. Like the people who, does it sound insulting? I feel like it kind of sounds insulting, but then again, like, I don't know. So the person who wants to read true confession magazines, that's her example, instead of Victor Hugo can, but people who have the ability to appreciate Victor Hugo are not going to be kept down by the other people. Okay. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments below. Just as the number of its adherents is not a proof of an idea's truth or falsehood, of an artwork's merit or demerit, of a product's efficacy or inefficacy, so the free market value of goods or services does not necessarily represent their philosophically objective value, but only their socially objective value, i.e. the sum of the individual judgments of all the men involved in trade at a given time, the sum of what they valued, each in the context of his own life. Thus, a manufacturer of lipstick may well make a greater fortune than a manufacturer of microscopes. So lipstick and microscopes. There's like a couple of comparisons, right? Airplanes and bicycles, Victor Hugo and some kind of magazine, and then lipsticks and microscopes. So what do we think of her examples and comparisons? Even though it can be rationally demonstrated that microscopes are scientifically more valuable than lipstick, but valuable to whom? A microscope is of no value to a little stenographer struggling to make a living. Like, I wonder if feminists would like this, in the sense that in feminist like theory and mindset, the focus is on, well, they would say subjectivity and individual experience, and like allowing for spaces, allowing for various voices in the space. It's a little, it's an interesting question, I think, that could be asked. A lipstick to her may mean the difference between self-confidence and self-doubt, between glamour and drudgery. This does not, I was just thinking, well, I mean, would feminists like that? I mean, like, feminism isn't like a like a monolith. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's diversity in feminism, right? There are feminist essentialists and there are feminist constructivists and radical feminists that support certain lifestyles that you think feminists maybe wouldn't support. So this does not mean, however, that the values ruling a free market are subjective. If the stenographer spends all her money on cosmetics and has none left to pay for the use of a microscope, for a visit to the doctor, that must be like a 1950s thing, when she needs it, she learns a better method of budgeting her income. The free market serves as her teacher. She has no way to penalize others for her mistakes. If she budgets rationally, the microscope is always available to serve her own specific needs and no more, as far as she is concerned. She's not taxed to support an entire hospital, a research laboratory, or a spaceship's journey to the moon. Within her own productive power, she does pay a part of the cost of scientific achievements when and as she needs them. She has no social duty. Her own life is her own responsibility, and the only thing that a capitalist system requires of her is the thing that nature requires, rationality, i.e., that she live and act to the best of her own judgment. So basically, if you want to focus on or spend your money or time on what Rand would probably call the superficial, you go ahead. Capitalism is the economic system that allows you to do that. Within every category of goods and services, and I still think that maybe she's conflating capitalism with like political systems, but just wanted to point that out. Within every category of goods and services offered on a free market, it is the purveyor of the best product at the cheapest price who wins the best, greatest financial rewards in that field. Not automatically, nor immediately, nor by fiat, but by virtue of, am I saying that word right? The virtue of the free market, which teaches every participant to look for the objective best within the category of his own competence, and penalizes those who act on irrational considerations. Now observe that a free market does not level men down to some common denominator, that the intellectual criteria of the majority do not rule a free market or a free society, and that the exceptional men, the innovators, the intellectual giants, are not held down by the majority. Here to us. In fact, it is the members of this exceptional minority who lift the whole society, the whole of a free society to the level of their own achievements while rising further and further. So you don't need a dictatorship to rise to the ideals of like said ideal dictator. If there's an ideal dictator, I'm just thinking of like Plato. Someone who is a philosopher king and at least has like good intentions, not intentions for their own, I guess, self-improvement or self-success. A free market is a continuous process that cannot be held still, an upward process that demands the best, the most rational of every man, and rewards him accordingly. While the majority have barely assimilated the value of the automobile, the creative minority introduces the airplane. The majority learn by demonstration. The minority are free to demonstrate. The philosophically objective value of a new product serves as the teacher for those who are willing to exercise their rational faculty, each to the extent of his ability. Those who are unwilling to remain unrewarded, as well as those who aspire to more than their ability produces. The stagnant, the irrational, the subjectivists have no power to stop their betters. So which are you? Okay, just 3 more small paragraphs. The small minority of adults who are unable rather than, so she has like a little aside here, who are unable rather than unwilling to work have to rely on voluntary charity. Misfortune, I feel like she should say the word though, is not a claim to slave labor. There is no such thing as the right to consume, control, and destroy those without whom one would be unable to survive. As to depressions and mass unemployment, they are not caused by the free market, but by government interference into the economy. Okay, I'd love a footnote there to just explain like why she thinks that. But all right, so does she have like the most compassion? Like, just because you are unfortunate does not mean that you can make slaves of those who are fortunate? Is that what she's saying? I mean, I don't know. I don't love it. The mental parasites, the imitators who attempt to cater to what they think is the public's known taste. Mental parasites. It's kind of heavy. Are constantly being beaten by the innovators whose products raise the public's knowledge and taste to ever higher levels. It is in this sense that the free market is ruled not by the consumers, but the producers. Okay, very interesting. The most successful ones are those who discover new fields of production, fields which had not been known to exist. So there are imitation innovators and like the reasonable innovators, I think. A given product may not be appreciated at once, particularly if it is too radical in innovation, but barring irrelevant accidents, it wins in the long run. So that's her game. It's a long run game. It is in the sense that the free market is not ruled by the intellectual criteria of the majority, which prevail only at and for any given moment. The free market is ruled by those who are able to see and plan long range, and the better the mind, the longer the range. Okay, so we're going to stop there. I think that's an interesting little spot. I might have one more video on this, but I actually have to finish this for next week for my political economy class. So, yeah, so I have to read it a little quicker than I have been. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments if you think that capitalism, more than other economic systems, allows us to be superficial if we want to, and if via freedom, that is a good thing. Thanks, everyone.